Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this is part two of the three-part Ultimate Superman edition of Movie Goodness, where we explore all of Superman's appearances in comics, on television, and film. Part two focuses on television, the small screen, where we got multiple appearances of the character of Superman, of Clark Kent in live action and animated form. And in case you don't know, you've been living in the Mariana Trench for your entire life. Superman is a comic book character that was created in 1938 and has appeared in many types of media since the 1940s. Superman has appeared on radio, television, movies, video games, each on multiple occasions, and his name, symbol, and image have appeared on products as well as merchandise, and is widely regarded as the greatest superhero in all of comics, not just in DC. We're talking Marvel, Image Comics, all the independent affiliates and whatnot. Superman is the poster child for comic book characters, and this showcase of Superman is in anticipation of the brand new film written and directed by James Gunn, kicking off the official start of the DCU over at DC Studios and Warner Brother Pictures. Superman, that stars David Corn Sweat as the famed Kryptonian himself, Superman. I am I am excited for this new Superman that's coming out, and not over the moon excited, like oh my god, this is going to be something innovative and new. I don't think we're going to get anything innovative and new, but I do think we're going to get a very comics accurate Superman in this film that we haven't seen on the big screen before, which I guess you can say is innovative and new. But I am excited to see how James Gunn's take of this character goes, and how is he going to set this universe into motion, to give us a snippet of what's to come. With Supergirl coming down the pike, we have lanterns coming. Peacemaker is already around, but that is a part of this universe and everything else. So it's going to be interesting to see uh, uh, how this universe is going to shape out. And this is with us knowing, unlike, when Iron Man came out in 2008, we didn't know it was setting up a MCU. We just thought it was a movie, and it ultimately set off a chain of events that led us to, cinematic glory with the MCU and Avengers films and Thor and Captain America and so on and so forth. And it's been exciting. It's been exciting watching Marvel. Not so much in the last couple of years, but hopefully they can bounce back. Now we move over to DC, and we know that this is setting up a universe, and that's a lot of pressure on James Gunn and everybody over there at DC to really knock this out the park. And we have a lot of content uh, involving this character that spans close to 90 years that you can go back and see, sift through and pick and say, I can do this differently, or I'm not going to include this and whatnot. And so today we're going to touch in on some of the things that this new DC can pull from, some good and some bad that they can avoid, hopefully, with this new film coming up. Like I said, today's episode, part two of the Ultimate Superman edition, will focus on Superman on television, and we're going to dive into live action and the animated features, and well, not features, but shows that featured Superman, and go through the history of this character on the small screen. of course, this, like I said, to start off, this character has been around since 1938. And as far as media is concerned, this was before television. So the character did pop up on radio in The Adventures of Superman that premiered in 1940 and ran on radio for 11 years. It finally ended in 1951. And that was to make way for this new innovative technological advancement in human history, the television. And we got The Adventures of Superman on TV. Well, I say we as people, because I wasn't around in 1952. I wasn't even thought of in 1952. But what was thought of was making a live action Superman television show. And we got it with Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves as Clark Kent, aka Superman. And even though I wasn't around in 1952 to watch the world premiere and be in front of TV every evening or afternoon whenever it dropped on TV to partake in it, I did watch the reruns. It was in the 80s, of course. I was a kid, and I can't tell you the when, who, how, and what, why it was on television, why it was being uh, uh, played on TV as reruns. But, back then, we didn't have over 300 channels to choose from and 500 different streaming services to choose from. You only had about 10, 15 channels at best to watch. And I remember watching a lot of reruns from around that era. Not only the Adventures of Superman, the Monsters, the Addams Family, those type of shows, Bewitched and all that stuff. I remember watching all those back then. But the Adventures of Superman really piqued me because I was a comic book guy. I was a superhero guy. So I really wanted to jump into that. And plus, I had seen the Christopher Reeves movies at this point. So I really wanted to dive into that. And I always found it kind of interesting that the two Supermen that I knew, that I've actually seen in live action up to that point, both had the last name Reeves. And I thought that they were related. I thought that Christopher Reeves was George Reeves' son or something. Oh, he's picking up the mantle from his dad or something. That's what I thought around that time. Like, we didn't have Google, and so I'm just going off the assumption that they were related. But no, it was just a mere coincidence. And then, uh, not to break into our part three, but at one point, Keanu Reeves was in consideration to be Superman for a version of that film that I believe the Rakowskis was going to direct, from the Matrix fame. But of course, that fell through. But in any event, The Adventures of Superman was a show. It was mainly in black and white, but it did transition into color. I want to say like 2 or 3 seasons in. That's when we got color for that show. But it is what it is. I didn't care. Nobody cared who watched it. It was fun to watch George Reeves in that character. And I think he did an excellent job, even though uh depending on what reports that you read or know the history of George Reeves and his untimely demise, that this character really destroyed him. And it led to this Superman curse that a lot of people have associated with people who played the role of Superman. And it's going all the way back to radio, but we'll dive into that another time. This adaptation of the character was pretty accurate to a degree, at least the Superman part of it in that era, how the character was and how his powers worked and everything. It was pretty accurate. Now, just like every other comic book character, it evolved over time. For instance, Superman early on didn't fly. He just leaped, he just jumped. And as time went on, it developed into him flying, him being able to control gravity and whatnot. So it all involved, but this was cute. It was a cute little show. It's you know, if I had to compare it to the Adam West Batman from the 60s, I would enjoy this a little more. And the Batman is my number one guy, but you know, that Adam West show, which was another one I watched in reruns, of course, it it was so campy, and so was this, but it was just campy. it was it was just dripping camp. This show, for the most part, tried to take itself seriously. I mean, Superman didn't fight his typical rogues gallery of villains. He fought gangsters and crooks and stuff like that. He didn't go up against any other metahumans or super villains like that on this show. But it was the 50s. What could you expect? You're not going to see Brainiac pop up on. You're not going to see Metallo pop up on the Adventures of Superman. But for what it was enjoyable. It ran from 1952 to 1958 on television. Our next adaptation of this famed comic book character came in 1966 with the animated show, The New Adventures of Superman. This show ran for 4 seasons on CBS, and the voice of Superman was provided by Bill or Bud Collier. And I have no knowledge of this show. I did not watch any of this. Well, I wasn't around, but I didn't even catch them on reruns. I didn't know anything about this show until I was doing research for this show. So it was interesting to dive into it, that this was a part of a kind of a shared universe before we had shared universes, because the first season of this was The New Adventures of Superman. The second season was the Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure, and that ran for 1 season. And then the third season was the Batman Superman Hour. And then in his fourth and final season, it went back to the New Adventures of Superman. So it was his own cinematic universe, if you will, for the we got the MCU and the DCUs and the Monsterverse and all this other stuff that's been popping up lately, and everybody's running around like it's something that is reinventing the wheel or discovering sliced bread for the first time. But no, this has been around since the 60s, this shared cinematic universe. And that started, well, I'm going to say started, but at least in DC terms, with The New Adventures of Superman, the animated show, in 1966. And it ran all the way till 1970. And then in 1973, we got a show that, if you're a person of a certain age, I'm more than certain you've seen this show, heard about this show, heard it referenced in something. But the Super Friends premiered on ABC in 1973. Super Friends was an animated television series about a team of superheroes. And of course, that team was the Justice League, but at the time they were Super Friends, and the main one was Superman. In this show, Superman was voiced by Danny Dark. And just like The New Adventures of Superman, every season of this show had a different iteration. It was like a different show, but it was all part of the same show. This show ran for 9 seasons. The first season was called Super Friends. The second season, the all new Super Friends Hour. The third season, Challenge of the Super Friends. Fourth season, The World's Greatest Super Friends. And then it went back in 1980 to Super Friends, and it ran for 3 seasons under the title Super Friends until 1984, when it was retitled Super Friends, the Legendary Superpower Show. And the final season in 1985 the Superpowers team, Galactic Guardians. That was, and I remember I was around for those. I wasn't there from the beginning, but I was there when I think for the second iteration of Super Friends into that final run for the last like 3 seasons of it. But I finally remember watching it with my brother, Super Friends. So now we're getting into the portion of Superman lore that I was blessed to be on this earth for. So yeah, I do remember this. This was an exciting show because not only did you get Superman, you got the entire Justice League, man. You got the Legion of Doom. You got uh so many fun shows. And once again, it was the late 70s into the 80s, early 80s, and of course, the animation was the animation. You know, this was Hanna Barbera, and so it had that tone. But if you grew up in that era, if you grew up around the time I grew up, you loved this, man. This was the bee's knees. You feel me? I loved Super Friends growing up, and man, they just haven't hit the cultural zeitgeist like that until a little later on, and we're gonna eventually get to it where we finally got something that was to the level, if not greater, than Super Friends. But at that time, this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So after the end of Super Friends, we finally get back into the live action adaptation of this character. And the only reason this show exists is because of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. And that is not a rousing endorsement for this show. But at the same time, the studio that owned the rights at the time, I think they were the uh, Sorkin brothers, or father and son, I believe. They own the rights to Superman. They the ones who made Superman 4 Quest for Peace, and they wanted a companion show to go along with the movie. And so I don't know who they talked to and who thought this was a bright idea. It could have been a good idea. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It probably looked good on paper, but in motion, it didn't quite work. And it was the 1988 syndicated show Superboy, or The Adventures of Superboy. It was retitled that in season 3. Shockingly, this went on for 4 seasons. This was not, I repeat, this was not a good show. This was an attempt at a Smallville before we got to Smallville. Smallville did it right, but this show was just horrible, and it was horrible back then. And this was during a time when I accepted anything, superhero related. I would defend it to my death, those shows and movies that we got around that time, because we weren't getting any superhero content. See, now we're oversaturated with superhero content. I mean, we're getting 4 or 5 superhero movies a year. We get about 10 superhero TV shows a year. So I mean, we're getting it. We're spoiled now. But back in the 80s, 90s, and so on, no. Every now and then, every blue moon, whenever Haley's Comet came around, that's when we got a superhero movie and or TV show. They never simultaneously. And so when Superboy dropped, and you already got the bad taste of Superman 4 in your mouth, and then they plopped this on to the small screen, it was like, I don't even understand what this is what's happening right now. John Heems Newton portrayed Clark Kent, aka Superboy, in that first season, but from season 2 to season 4, Gerard Christopher took over the role. I don't know why uh, John Newton didn't return for the last 3 seasons. He probably, I'm gonna give him credit. He probably said, "This is gonna destroy my career, so I'm just gonna walk away from it," and that was a smart choice. But even though I haven't seen anything from him after that. But it is this was just a boring show. It is nothing exciting about this show. There's really nothing to, and to be completely honest, I only watched 2 seasons or maybe 1.5 seasons, and I just gave up. Normally I'll give a show time to breathe to get his footing right. You know what I'm saying? But I knew this wasn't going to work for me, and I abandoned the show just like everybody else did. The fact that it ran for 4 seasons is a shock, but not really back then. Back then, shows got time, like I said, to get their feet wet, to get their feet under them, I should say, especially in syndication. If you weren't tied to a network, you had time. Just think of Baywatch. Baywatch, it started off on network television, it got canceled, hopped on to syndication, and the rest is history. So it was given time. Shows were given time back then, and but this show was given too much time, in my humble opinion. Now, season 3 and 4 probably got better. I don't know. I probably would never know, because I seriously doubt that I go back to watch those 4 seasons of Superboy, just for giggles. I don't see that happening. But it still ran from 1988 to 1992, and TV networks knew the value in this character. They knew good and well how valuable Superman was and how lucrative this character can be if given the right space, if given the right production value, the right care and love and attention. And we got that in 1993. The following year, after the Adventures of Superboy ended, we got Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman. Lois and Clark, which premiered on ABC in 1993, was a phenomenon of sorts. It wasn't like a monster hit. Everybody was tuning in to Lois and Clark. It wasn't on that level, but everybody knew of it. You know what I'm saying? It was like, okay, that's interesting. This is something new. It isn't just Superman going around punchy, punchy, fly, fly, fly. It was a story, and it focused on Lois and Clark. It was about their relationship. And in this show, you have Dean Cain as Clark Kent Superman, which, right off the bat, I was confused by that back in 1993, because Dean Clark did not radiate Superman to me. He just didn't have that Superman number one body physique, even though he's a nice built guy, but he just looked small. He didn't feel like a presence, especially in the suit. When he was Clark Kent, I thought he was really good as Clark Kent, which is mainly what the show was about. Him being Clark. But when he was in the suit, as Superman, I don't know, man. I just couldn't connect with it. But I super enjoyed the chemistry between Dean Cain and Terry Hatchett, who played Lois Lane. And look, oh boy, Terry Hatchett, you want to talk about a crush in 1993. I was crushing on Terry Hatchett, still is, man. I seen a picture of her not too long ago, and I'm like, man, she is still beautiful. That is a beautiful woman. But besides that, I thought she was a really, really good 1990s version of Lois Lane. If we're going era rise, in that era of the 90s, that style of reporter, I guess you can say, whoever you envisioned, and she did a good job capturing that character to me. She was the standout in the show more than Dean Cain as Superman. But I guess that's why it was called Lois and Clark. But they also was trying to hook the female viewer, around that time, and understandable, and still have the male viewer come in because it's Superman, and trying to appease to everybody. You had Lex Luthor in here, you had all of the usual comic book characters, that normally would pop up in a Superman comic that was in this show, but it was kind of dumbed down, for lack of a better term, for network television. But I did enjoy the show. What kind of torpedoed the show for me is when they got married. After they got married, it was over for me. Because what was appealing for the first couple of seasons of this show was the will they won't they. Yeah, they were in a relationship, but were they willing to go to that next level? Now, up to this point, I think in the comics, Superman and Lois had just got married in the comics. For years, it didn't happen. And they finally did it around this time, if I'm not mistaken. Could be off by a couple of years or two. But they were kind of trying to cash in on that big comic book event that took place. And so after that, the show kind of lost its cuteness, its little wink and nod to the viewer, and it turned into something else. And you lost all the excitement for it. But it ended not too long after that. It only, just like Superboy, it only lasted 4 seasons from 93 to 97. But I thought it was a good run for a pretty decent show. Oh, but we didn't have to wait long. Actually, we didn't have to wait at all, because this premiered in 1996, which kind of helped in Lois and Clark because we got an actual comic accurate depiction of the character of Superman with Superman the animated series, which premiered on the Kids CW, not CW, well, it ended up being CW later on, but Kids WB in 1996, and it ran till the year 2000. This was an amazing show, and this was coming off the heels of Batman the animated series, which was set in the same universe, but it spun off. We got an actual Superman one in 1996, and man, it was exciting. Tim Daly provided the voice of Superman, uh, who did an excellent job. He didn't do it long, I don't think. I think after the series was over, he stepped away, and George Newbarn took over, if I'm not mistaken. But Tim, but who does a really good voice as well. He's similar to Tim Daly, but Tim Daly, he just like Kevin Conroy is the definitive Batman voice you hear in your head. Tim Daly is the definitive Superman voice you hear in your head. They did perfect voice casting for these roles, man. For these shows, bruh. I love this show for the simple fact this was the first show that we got comics accurate storytelling episode per episode. It was like reading a comic book. Now it didn't follow the comics verbatim. Of course, they made their changes, and I mentioned this many a times on this show and other shows that uh whenever you transfer medias, it's going to be a change. You're going to make changes, and that's fine. But the changes they made, I thought was pretty decent. They were pretty decent. We got Lex Luthor, we got the Justice League, we got Wonder Woman, Flash, and all of these characters, and this led into other shows as well, but and that I'm gonna touch on. But uh, this show really captured the essence of Superman, and I still watch it. I own I own the physical media, the DVD of this series, as well as Batman the animated series, and that's how much I love these shows, these animated shows, and God, I miss them. I wish they would do more now, but man, this was just so well done. The animation style, the like I said, the voice acting, the storytelling. I mean, how it blended the universe, this shared universe that went on for years. I think it just ended a couple of years ago. That started all the way back in the 90s. But you got Batman animated series to this to Justice League Unlimited, and all of the animated films that came out of this as well. But man, what an excellent show. One of my favorite adaptations of Superman, the character, was Superman, the animated series, which ran from 1996 to the year 2000. But the very next year, in 2001, we got a show that had no business working out the way that it did, but it did. And I'm so glad that it did. It is none other than Smallville, which premiered on October the 16th, 2001, and it ran all the way to May 13th, 2011. This was the definitive quote unquote Superboy show. Smallville followed the coming of age adventures of teenage Clark Kent in his fictional hometown of Smallville, Kansas, before he was formally introduced to the world as the Man of Steel, Superman himself. This was first premiered on the WB when it was the WB. Then it merged into with what was the station it merged with? I forgot what network. I think it was the UPN. It merged with UPN and it became the CW, and it's still around to this day. And this was, I guess you could say, the first official real CW show. You know, this set the tone for the rest of this network's tenure. And, you know, I guess you can say that CW has never raised to the heights that it did with Smallville. Yeah, you can argue that the Arrowverse kind of competed with it, but Smallville, it just holds a special place in my heart. I can't speak for everybody, but it holds a special place in my heart. I remember where I was October the 16th, 2001. I had no earthly idea that this show was even happening, let alone coming on that night. I was channel surfing and trying to find something to watch around the time that it premiered, and I just happened upon the opening to this show. And I'm like, okay, well, what is this? And I didn't know the name of it or nothing. Actually, I think I did. It was Smallville. But I was dumb. It didn't register what this show was. I saw Smallville, but I didn't know what it was. In the opening of the show, you had this Armageddon type interest with all of these meteors falling onto this farm town. And I'm like, what is this? I thought it was a movie, you know, it was just meteor showers and all this other stuff. And then we get the famous little spaceship that held the baby, and the couple discovers the baby. I'm like, wait, how did I not know this? How did I not know that this was a Superman show? This is the origin of Superman. I mean, Smallville? Why would they name it Smallville? It didn't really register that, okay, this is going to be about Smallville, you know, where he grew up. And I felt like such a fool. I remember going and telling a friend of mine that same story, just the way I laid it out to you. And he was like, you didn't know that was Superman? That the show was going to be about Superman? I'm like, no, I didn't know. And so from that opening episode, premiere pilot, I guess you could say, I was hooked, and I watched every single episode, every single season for 10 straight years, and I was not disappointed at all. No, what did every single episode and season work for me? No, especially towards the end. I think it went about maybe 3 seasons too long for me, but uh, overall, this was greatness. This was greatness. I enjoyed Smallville. You had Tom Welling perfectly portraying this teenage Clark Kent, and as he got older, as the show went on, I was like, man, just put him in the movie. He is Clark Kent. He is Superman at this point. The show was a Superman show, even though he never wore the suit, We never got to see him in the suit because the showrunners had promised early on that this would not be a Superman show, even though it was. you know, even though it was, because you had Lex Luthor, who was perfectly cast with Michael Rosenbaum, who is, in my humble opinion, the definitive Lex Luthor up to this point. He is the Lex Luthor that I hold at number one, in overall portrayals of Lex Luthor. Yes, I love Gene Hackman, God rest his soul. Even Kevin Spacey, he did a pretty decent job. Jesse Eisenberg, not so much, but Michael Rosenbaum was perfect as Lex Luthor. And his father, who was played by, I think, John Glover, he was really Lex Luthor. He was just an older version of him. I loved his character. I just loved everything about this show. You had Clark going up against all of his rogues gallery from the comics. Brainiac popped up. Even Doomsday popped up on this show. Metallo and all these. Everybody popped up on this show. On the hero side, same thing. Flash, Aquaman, Green Arrow. They all end up coming on to this show in guest spots and whatnot. And I thought that was a unique and interesting way for them to tell a Superman story without it being a quote unquote Superman show. And it was fun. We didn't get to see Tom Welling in a suit, technically, even though in the very last shot of the very last episode of the very last season, we did get to see him open up the shirt on top of the Daily Planet, and you see the Superman emblem as he run towards the camera, and it cuts to black. And that was like, okay, that was a beautiful nod for all of us who stayed seated every Wednesday or Thursday night, whatever night it was that it came on, for 10 years. And it was a nice reward for everybody. And I loved it. I absolutely loved that show, to the point where Tom Welling returned as Clark Kent on the crossover that the Arrowverse did in Crisis of Infinite Earth, little event that they did. And I thought that was nice. I thought that was really nice that they gave a little shout out and let him come back. Of course, in Crisis in Infinite Earth, they had everybody pop up in that little crossover event. It was cute. It was all fan service and all that other stuff. It wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. That was pretty much the end of the Arrowverse, in my humble opinion, because it was nowhere else to go from that point. But Smallville is probably the best live action adaptation of Superman, or should I just say Clark Kent, that we have received. I absolutely adore that show to this day. Running kind of concurrent with Smallville was an animated series, not Superman animated series, but you had Justice League and Justice League Unlimited that ran from 2001 and 2006. I already kind of touched in on that, talking about the Superman animated series. The same principles. Superman was kind of the 1B of the Batman 1A leader of this show, but it was an exciting show. Still is. I still watch episodes of that show on Max. Occasionally I'll pop up on Max and click on it and watch an episode or two. I enjoyed that show as well. They just, man, I really hate that we don't get the same content that we used to get. I'm sounding like an old fart right now, but yeah, back in my day type stuff. But I wish we had content like we had when I was growing up. And I was older then. By this time, I actually had kids in 2001 going forward. But still, I was a kid myself, diving into these animated series. And still to this day, as you can hear. And so I still haven't grown up. And if you ask my wife, I haven't. So That's neither here. That's a show for another day. But yes, Justice League and Justice League Unlimited ran from 2001 and 2006. Speaking of 2006, we got another show, another animated series that was a Saturday morning cartoon, and this was my last gasp, and I think everybody's last gasp at Saturday morning cartoons. Legion of Superheroes, which premiered on September the 23rd, 2006. Uh, this was a really fun show. I was completely invested in this show. I had a lot of fun with Legion of Superheroes because I didn't read those comics. I didn't follow those comics closely when I was deep into comics. Unlike now, where I just can't carve out enough time to get into it. But this was a fun show. The show drew on the rich history of the Legion of Superheroes, taking inspiration from stories set during all time periods of the team's nearly 50-year history in comics. It's also had tiny tie-ins to the spin-off comic book series Legion of Superheroes in the 31st Century that lasted 20 issues in the comics. But unfortunately, the show only lasted 2 seasons as it was canceled after its second season. And I thought it was starting to ramp up. Even though it was exciting, I had fun with it throughout those 2 seasons, but that second season was really starting to get into some deep subject matter, and unfortunately, it didn't last long. But I think it was just a casualty of the times because around that time, 2008, 2009, that's when Saturday morning cartoons went the way of the dodo. So, unfortunately, no more, no more animated shows like we used to get back in the day. Flashing forward to 2010 or 2010, November the 26th to be exact, 2010, we got another show, and it was Young Justice. And that was a show that it kind of took me a minute to get into. I didn't watch Young Justice until I think it was the DC Universe app when they had their own streaming service, and it popped up on there. That's when I really got into it. But in its first, and that was around when did it start? I think it was, oh man, when was that? I think we were like 3 seasons in at that point before I actually jumped into Young Justice. But it first premiered on Cartoon Network on November the 26th, 2010. And, once I really got into it, and it was 2019. Yeah, it was right before the pandemic. I remember that when I started watching it on DC Universe. But this was a good show, and I was hearing about it, but I wasn't really, into it at that point. I think I was kind of done with the animated uh, shows at that point because I was disappointed with, all of the cancellations that were going on. And then I got mad because, you had all these streaming services popping up, and I didn't want to pay for all of these streaming services just to watch one or two shows and have to pay $15 a month just for that. And it was just frustrating. And so I didn't really get into it, even though it was on Cartoon Network, but I just couldn't get into it for some strange reason, even though I was hearing about how good it was. And so when we got to season 3 and I picked up on it, just exploring this new app that I had purchased, DC Universe, I said, okay, let me check it out. Let me just check out the first few episodes, and I'll see then. Man, I was mad. I was like, bro, I should have been watching this show. I should have been watching this show because it was essentially canceled after Cartoon Network let it go. Cartoon Network canceled it after 2 seasons in 2012. And so when we got to 2019 and they launched this new DC universe where all of DC Comics content was on it, and I loved that app. That was one of my favorite apps. It's just a little side note because not only did you get shows, TV shows, movies, and all and this going all the way back, old, like the old Flash show that came out in the 90s and stuff like that. Uh, you can read comic books on the app. DC Comics on the app, and that's where I was getting caught up on a lot of comics around that time because I had access to them pretty easily, and so I loved that app. And it didn't last long. I think it only lasted about 2 years, 2 or 3 years before they put the 86 on it. I think that's when they merged it with HBO Max. But yeah, that's when I got into the Young Justice series, and it was a really good show. It lasted till 2022 when it finally came to an end after its fourth season. But boy, yeah, I wish they would have bring that back. I wish they would have kept going with that because that was a not only for the animation and the typical superhero animated show content, but it went into some deep subject matter, deep subject matter that was not for kids. It wasn't a quote unquote kid friendly show. This really went there, and I was shocked by that, and I absolutely adored this show. Superman wasn't the front runner here because we were dealing with the younger versions of our Justice League, if you will. But he popped up every now and then along with the other members of the Justice League, Aquaman, Batman, Flash, and so forth. But overall, this was an excellent animated series that lasted for 4 seasons, even though those 4 seasons stretched out for a 12-year period. Going back to live action, back in 2018, we got a show on the Sci-Fi Network called Krypton, and this show lasted 2 seasons. And to be 100% honest with you all, I think I only watched 2 episodes total of this show. I just couldn't get it. I didn't understand why we were getting this show. This was supposed to be connected to the Man of Steel movie, and it was like it wasn't like it was a prequel because this not film but TV show was set I can't tell you the year, but it follows Superman's grandfather, whose family, coincidentally, the House of El, has been shamed in Krypton. And so the grandfather fights to redeem the family honor and save his beloved world from chaos. And it was just like, why? Who was asking for this? Who was asking for this? Now, granted, I would have loved to see a Krypton show, but I wanted to see a Krypton show with Russell Crowe, as Jor-El, because that opening, not scene, but sequence with Russell Crowe and Michael Shannon as Zod, I love that, in Man of Steel. I loved how Zack Snyder set up that world in Man of Steel. Yeah, I wanted to see that. I didn't need to go back to his father and see, how he fought for his family name, because I didn't feel the stakes in this show. Because I know that the family name was restored, but I don't know. It just didn't grab me, unfortunately. But in the 2 episodes that I watched were, they weren't bad, but they definitely weren't good either. So, granted, it was sci-fi. It's the Sci-Fi Network. You're not gonna get anything Emmy worthy from the Sci-Fi Network, and they can come back and prove me wrong. But right now, no. I know Superman doesn't appear in this, but it is directly related to Superman. Krypton ran on the Sci-Fi Network from March 21st, 2018 to August 19th or 14th, 2019. Swinging on back or flying on back to keep with the theme of today's show, let's go back to the CW. And in 2021, we got Superman and Lois, not to be confused with Lois and Clark, but we got Superman and Lois in 2021. And this show was a spinoff of the Arrowverse. This version of Superman was first introduced in Crisis of Infinite Earth crossover event as kind of a backdoor pilot, and everybody received the character of Superman portrayed by Tyler Hoechlin. I never could get his name right. Forgive me, but he is excellent as Superman. He is excellent as Clark Kent, and I did not realize until maybe a year ago. I just randomly I watched Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks in that gangster film with Paul Newman, and Daniel Craig is in that as well. Really good movie. Awesome movie. But Tom Hanks' son is Tyler. That was him younger. And I didn't realize that. I did not know that. And I was like, wait, ain't that Superman? It showed up. It is. But this was a good show. This was top-notch levels of show. This did not deserve to be on CW. And I know a lot of people probably didn't watch this show because it was on CW. And all of the CW shows it had the same tone, same level of acting, same level of writing, everything. It was the same. It worked sometimes on the CW. I can't tell you the last time I tuned in to CW. I don't even know what's on the CW right now. But it was all the same around this era. And that includes Flash and everything else in the Arrowverse. They all felt the same. Superman and Lois did not. Superman and Lois was so good. So good. It did not deserve to be on the CW. In all due respect to the CW. Apparently they're doing something right because that show is still alive. I mean, not show, but the network is still alive and kicking today. But man, Superman and Lois felt like a show that deserved to be on a cable network or, a streaming service, one of the popular streaming services. It's that good of quality. The visual effects were top notch. The acting was top notch. The stories were top notch. The writing was top. Everything worked on this show, and this was a different Superman. This wasn't the same Superman that we got in Lois and Clark or any other iteration up to this point. This is a Superman that was the father. They took from the comics that, Superman did have kids with Lois, Jonathan and Jordan. I don't know about Jordan. I do remember Jonathan in the comics. I'm not 100% familiar with Jordan. I don't know if that was for the show or if it is in the comics. If it is, I haven't been following him as closely as of late. So there could be a new addition to the comics, but I do remember Jonathan. But I didn't care. I didn't care. This version of Superman is seasoned. He's been saving the world for many years, and he settled down with Lois. Yet he's still Superman. He's that's his job. We get the moments with him and Lois, and it did a lot to showcase Lois Lane as well. It wasn't just Lois being there for eye candy or nothing like that, or being the damsel in distress or nothing like that. Lois got her time to shine as well. But I absolutely adored this show all the way through. When this show ended, I was legitimately upset because I think it could have went another 2, possibly 3 more seasons if they would have put in the work. But I understand, sometimes is best to leave on top. And this show definitely did. It ran for 4 glorious seasons on the CW, starting February the 23rd, 2021, ending on December the 2nd, 2024. And last but certainly not least, as far as Superman on the small screen, we have My Adventures with Superman, which premiered on Adult Swim or the Cartoon Network, whichever one you want to roll with, July the 7th, 2023, and it is still ongoing as of today. This show is pretty doggone good. Once again, another show that I wasn't interested in seeing. I was like, okay, we're going back to the well again, doing another animated Superman show. Probably going to tell the same story and whatnot. I that's my big hang up with it. You know, how many Superman stories you can tell, at least that haven't been told. And, you know, I need you to do something different. I need you to spice it up. That's why I love Superman and Lois so much. You did something different that we haven't seen. And I didn't, going in before the show premiered, I didn't feel that My Adventures with Superman was going to be anything different, other than the fact that it had a anime influence on its animation style. Okay. And once again, I think it was a Saturday. It had to be a Saturday because I was off and I was at home and looking for something to watch. And I think I was on Max. And I said, well, I ain't doing nothing. I went ahead and clicked on it and started watching. I think I got caught up to uh, the third episode or something like that. And I watched those 3 episodes back to back. And from that moment on, I was there whenever the episodes dropped. I was hooked. Clark Kent, Superman, is voiced by Jack Quaid. Yes, that Jack Quaid. From The Boys. He's the what was he in recently? I just saw the movie. Novocaine. He was in Novocaine, Companion. He's the son of Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan. He's really carving out a legacy of his own as of late, and he provides the voice of Superman in this show. And I think I consider myself a fan of Jack Quaid. You know, when they announced him as being the voice of Superman, I was like, I don't see it until I watched the show, and it fit so perfectly. This was or is an excellent, excellent show. We once again we see a different Superman. This isn't the super confident Superman who is seasoned, who is in complete control of his abilities and whatnot. This is a Superman that is just getting started, and he is trying to figure it all out, trying to balance the Clark Kent life and the Superman life without causing damage to the people that he love and care for. And it's just a really, really good show. The way they incorporate the villains in this show, I think, is unique. With Lex Luthor, he's a presence, but he's not the presence. He hasn't become the arch nemesis as of yet, but he's getting there. I think next season we'll finally get there. Brainiac has popped up. Task Force X has popped up on this show. Last season, I think his cousin Supergirl popped up as well. It's so good. The relationship between Clark and Lois is dynamite on this show, as well as Jimmy Olsen on this show as his best friend, and you really feel the camaraderie between those characters. I really do enjoy it. I can't wait for the 4th season. I think it's the 4th that's coming up. The 4th season to drop soon. But man, this has been the 3rd season. But this has been a real fun ride to go on with My Adventures with Superman that is still ongoing. The 3rd season should be coming very, very soon. And so that is Superman on the small screen, Superman on television. And of course, he's popped up in many other shows. I just tried to focus on shows that centered around him for this episode, but like I said, he's popped up in the Harley Quinn series, animated series. He's popped up in I think it was Justice League Action, that little cutesy animated show that was on um, uh, uh, Cartoon Network, I believe, and the Brave and the Bold, Batman, the Brave and the Bold, and the Batman, all of the Batman. See, Teen Titans Go, the list goes on and on. But yeah, we have gotten a lot of the Man of Steel over the last 80 going on 90 years on the small screen, and there's more to come. There's more to come. There's no stopping this train. Superman is Superman. I mean, you can't get around it, and I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. I mentioned a few times on this episode that I doubted, and then when I did go back to watch it, I regretted it. So I can't count the Man of Steel out. And so that concludes part 2 of our Ultimate Superman edition here on Movie Goodness. What was your favorite Superman show? Was it Smallville? Was it Justice League? Or was it Superman animated series? Or are you old enough, or should I say seasoned enough, to have watched the Adventures of Superman back in the 50s? And that's your favorite. I would love to know your show. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Speaking of the KB Radio Network, there's a KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to Movie Goodness here on the KB Radio Network. As I said, this concludes part 2. Now, next episode, we are going into part 3, our final addition to the Superman edition of Movie Goodness, where we explore Superman on film. So I'll meet you over there for part 3 of the Ultimate Superman edition.